You can hate me, but don't ignore me, she whispered to her cold husband. The silent treatment. The frozen heart Sienna Hartley stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, watching the rain trace delicate patterns down the glass. The city below sparkled with 1,000 lights, each one a tiny universe of warmth and life. Inside their home, however, there was only cold silence. She wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of her champagne-colored dress offering no comfort against the chill that had settled into her bones. It wasn't the temperature of the room that made her shiver. It was the man sitting across from her, hidden behind his laptop screen, as distant as the stars. Dominic Ashford, her husband of 3 years, barely acknowledged her presence anymore. Once those steel-gray eyes had looked at her with such intensity that she felt seen down to her very soul. Now, those same eyes slid past her as if she were merely part of the furniture. "Dominic," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the gentle patter of rain. "We're supposed to leave for your parents' anniversary party in an hour." He didn't look up. His fingers continued their steady dance across the keyboard, responding to emails that were apparently more important than his wife. "I heard you," he replied, his tone flat and businesslike. "I'll be ready." Sienna closed her eyes, fighting back the familiar sting of tears. This had become their routine. Polite words exchanged like strangers passing on the street, shared spaces, but separate lives. A marriage that existed on paper but had died somewhere along the way, and she couldn't pinpoint exactly when or why. The beginning of the end it hadn't always been this way. Sienna let her mind drift back 3 years, to a time when everything felt possible. She had been working as an event coordinator for a high-profile charity auction. Dominic Ashford had walked into the ballroom like he owned it, which, given his wealth and influence, wasn't far from the truth. At 32, he was already a legend in the tech industry, having built his company from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. But what had struck Sienna wasn't his success, or his tailored suits, or even his devastating good looks. It was the way he had looked at her when their eyes met across the crowded room, like she was the only person who existed. "You're the one making all this magic happen," he had said when he finally approached her, gesturing to the elegant decorations and smoothly running event. "I just helped create the setting," she had replied, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the way her heart raced. "The real magic is the cause we're supporting tonight." He had smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. Beautiful and compassionate. "I'd like to know more about both the cause and the woman behind this evening." That conversation had turned into dinner the next night. Dinner had become weekly dates. Weekly dates had evolved into stolen weekends away. And 6 months later, when Dominic had dropped to one knee in the very ballroom where they'd met, Sienna had said yes, without hesitation. The wedding had been small but perfect. His vows had made her cry. Hers had made him smile, that transformative smile. They had honeymooned in the Maldives, spending lazy days on white sand beaches and passionate nights under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. For the first year, marriage had been everything she had dreamed. Yes, Dominic worked, long hours, but he always made time for her. He remembered her favorite flowers, bergamot tea, and the way she liked to walk barefoot on cool marble floors. He would come home and sweep her into his arms, asking about her day with genuine interest. But then something had shifted. The gradual freeze-it started subtly. Longer hours at the office, canceled date nights, conversations that grew shorter and more distant. Dominic began sleeping in his study, claiming he didn't want to disturb her when he worked late. Sienna had tried to be understanding. She knew the pressure he was under, the demands of running a major corporation. She had supported his career from the beginning and had no intention of becoming the nagging wife who demanded attention. But understanding turned to confusion when her attempts to reconnect were met with cold politeness. Confusion became hurt when he stopped touching her altogether. Not even casual brushes of hands or goodbye kisses, just empty air between them, growing wider every day. She had asked what was wrong, multiple times. His answer was always the same. Nothing. I'm just busy. But Sienna knew it was more than that. She could feel it in the way he looked through her rather than at her, in the way he tensed when she entered a room, in the carefully maintained physical distance he kept between them at all times. She had considered leaving, had drafted the words of a separation agreement in her mind during countless sleepless nights, but something kept her anchored here, in this beautiful, lonely penthouse with a man who had become a stranger. Love, she realized, didn't die easily. Even when neglected, even when met with coldness, it persisted, stubborn and painful. The anniversary party an hour later, they stood in the elevator descending to the parking garage. Dominic looked impeccable in his dark suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression carefully neutral. Sienna had touched up her makeup, hiding the redness around her eyes, and added a wrap to her dress. They looked like the perfect couple. Successful, beautiful, coordinated. No one would guess that they hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, that they slept in separate rooms, that Sienna sometimes felt she was drowning in loneliness despite being married. The drive to his parents' estate was silent except for the low murmur of classical music from the car's speakers. Sienna stared out the window, watching the rain create rivers down the glass, each drop racing others to the bottom. When they arrived, the house was already full of guests. Dominic's parents, Richard and Catherine Ashford, greeted them warmly. His mother pulled Sienna into a hug that lingered just a moment too long, her eyes searching Sienna's face with concern. "You look beautiful, dear," Catherine said softly. "But are you feeling well?" "Just a little tired," Sienna replied with a practiced smile. "Work has been busy." It was easier than the truth. "Your son has forgotten I exist." Throughout the evening, Sienna played her part perfectly. She smiled, made conversation with relatives and family friends, laughed at appropriate moments. Beside her, Dominic did the same. To everyone watching, they were the ideal couple. Only Sienna noticed how carefully Dominic avoided touching her, how he managed to keep at least a foot of space between them at all times, how his smiles never reached his eyes when he looked in her direction. As the evening wore on and the champagne flowed, Sienna found herself standing alone on the terrace, looking out over the manicured gardens. The rain had stopped, leaving everything fresh and glistening. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Dominic. She could always sense his presence, even when he tried to hide from her. "Your mother is asking for us," he said, his voice as emotionless as ever. "They're about to cut the cake." This was it. This was the moment Sienna realized she couldn't keep living in this frozen wasteland of a marriage. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when her heart was breaking a little more each day. She turned to face him, and for the first time in months, she let him see the raw pain in her eyes. "Dominic," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, just tell me what I did wrong. Tell me why you hate me." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or pain, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I don't hate you, Sienna," he said quietly. "Then why?" Her voice broke. "Why won't you even look at me anymore? Why won't you touch me? Why does it feel like I'm living with a ghost?" He stood frozen, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might actually answer, might finally give her the truth she so desperately needed. Instead, he looked away. That simple gesture, that turning away, shattered something inside her. Sienna stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, close enough to catch the familiar scent of his cologne that once made her feel safe. "You can hate me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You can despise everything about me. But please, Dominic, please don't ignore me. Don't act like I don't exist. I'm your wife. I'm still here. Can't you see me?" The words hung in the air between them, fragile and desperate, and for the first time in months, Dominic actually looked at her, really looked at her. His steel-gray eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. It wasn't indifference. It was agony. Breaking point and revelation. The unraveling. Dominic stared at his wife, really seeing her for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The moonlight caught the tears streaming down her face, making them shine like diamonds. Her eyes, those beautiful amber eyes that had captivated him from the moment they met, were filled with such raw pain that it physically hurt him to witness. "Don't ignore me," she had whispered. Those simple words cracked something open inside him that he had sealed shut months ago. "Sienna," he breathed, his carefully maintained composure crumbling. His hand reached out instinctively, then stopped mid-air, trembling. "I could never hate you." "Then what?" she demanded, her voice gaining strength through her tears. "What is this, Dominic? What have we become?" He turned away, gripping the terrace railing so hard his knuckles turned white. The words were right there, trapped in his throat, choking him. He had kept them buried for so long, convinced that silence was protection, but silence had become poison, destroying them both. "I'm protecting you," he finally said, the words coming out harsh and broken. Sienna let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Protecting me? By treating me like I'm invisible? By acting like our marriage means nothing? You don't understand? Then make me understand." She moved around to face him, forcing him to look at her. "I'm your wife, Dominic. We promised to face everything together. Remember? For better or worse. Was that just empty words to you?" "It wasn't empty," he said fiercely, his composure finally breaking completely. "Nothing about us was ever empty. Every moment with you was real. Every word I said, every promise I made. It was all real." "Was?" She caught the past tense, her voice going quiet. "So it's over then? Is that what this is? You're just too much of a coward to tell me directly?" The word coward hit him like a slap. Maybe that's exactly what he was. A coward who thought avoiding the truth would somehow make it less real. "7 months ago," he began, his voice rough, "I went to the doctor for a routine checkup. They found something, an irregularity. They wanted to run more tests." Sienna's face went pale. "What? Dominic, what are you talking about? I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. Not until I knew for sure." He forced himself to continue, each word feeling like broken glass in his throat. "The tests came back. It was bad, Sienna. Really bad. They told me I had maybe a year, possibly less." The world seemed to stop. Sienna stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock and horror. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not. I decided then that I wouldn't put you through it." Dominic continued, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "Watching me die, taking care of me, grieving. You're so young, so full of life. You deserved better than to become a widow before you even turned 30. So you decided to push me away." Sienna's voice rose with incredulity and rage. "You decided all by yourself that it would be easier for me if you just became a stranger? That watching you die would be harder than living with a man who treats me like I don't exist? I thought if I made you hate me, if I made it easier for you to leave, easier." She was shaking now, with anger, with grief, with emotions too powerful to contain. "Do you have any idea what these past 7 months have been like for me? Thinking I did something wrong, believing that the man I loved more than anything in this world had just stopped caring, lying awake every night wondering what was so terrible about me that you couldn't even stand to be in the same room?" "Sienna, I plan to leave," she said, her voice breaking. "I was going to file for divorce. I couldn't take it anymore, Dominic. The coldness, the silence, the feeling that I was completely alone in my own marriage. I was going to leave because I thought that's what you wanted." The pain in her voice destroyed him. He had been so focused on protecting her from grief that he had subjected her to something arguably worse: loneliness, rejection, self-doubt. "I'm sorry," he said, the words completely inadequate. "God, Sienna, I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you thought wrong." She cut him off, then suddenly her eyes narrowed. "Wait, you said 7 months ago that they said you had maybe a year. He nodded slowly. So that would mean you have about 5 months left. Her voice was carefully controlled now, the voice she used when she was thinking clearly despite emotional turmoil. According to their original prognosis, yes. But you're still here, still healthy, still working 80-hour weeks like you're trying to build a second empire. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. When was your last checkup, Dominic? He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. You haven't gone back, she said flatly. You got that initial diagnosis 7 months ago, and you've been avoiding all follow-up appointments because you've been so busy pushing me away and preparing for a death that you haven't even confirmed. Is actually coming. Put like that, it sounded insane. And maybe it was. I couldn't face it, he admitted. If I went back and the news was worse, if they moved up the timeline, or if the news was better. Sienna's voice was sharp now. If their initial diagnosis was wrong, if the irregularity resolved itself or was less serious than they thought. Did that possibility ever cross your mind, Dominic? Or were you so committed to your tragic hero narrative that you didn't even consider it? He stared at her, truly speechless. In all his planning, all his careful distance-keeping, he had never considered that possibility. The doctors had been so serious, so grave. The words aggressive and terminal had been used. He had taken their worst-case scenario as gospel and never looked back. Tomorrow, Sienna said firmly, pulling her phone from her clutch. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you're going to the doctor. We're getting current tests, current information, and actual answers instead of 7-month-old maybes. Sienna. No. She held up her hand. You don't get to argue. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about our marriage, our future, our life together. Not anymore. We're married, Dominic. That means we face things together. The good, the bad, the terrifying. Together. The word together broke something in him that had been holding firm through all of this. He had been so alone in his fear, carrying this burden in isolation, because he had convinced himself it was noble. But there was nothing noble about shutting out the person you loved most in the world. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified, Sienna. Of dying, yes. But more than that, of watching you suffer because of me, of taking your light and joy and replacing it with hospitals and pain and grief. She closed the distance between them and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You don't get to decide what I can and can't handle. You don't get to protect me from life by cutting me out of yours. I married you knowing that someday, somehow, we would face hard things. That's what marriage is, Dominic. It's choosing to face everything together, even the scary parts. Especially the scary parts. But if I am dying, then I want every single moment we have left, she said fiercely, tears streaming down her face again. I want to hold your hand through the hard days. I want to be there for every treatment, every appointment, every moment of pain and fear, because that's what love means. It doesn't run when things get difficult. It doesn't push away to avoid hurt. It stays. It fights. It holds on with everything it has. Dominic felt his own tears finally break free, running hot, down his face. I've wasted so much time. 7 months of pushing you away when I could have been holding you close. Then don't waste another second, Sienna whispered. And finally, she pulled him into her arms. The embrace felt like coming home after being lost for years. Dominic wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly he was afraid he might hurt her, but he couldn't let go. She buried her face in his chest, her body shaking with sobs, and he realized he was crying too. Great heaving sobs that shook his entire frame. I love you, he said against her hair, the words he had been holding back for months finally free. I love you so much, Sienna. I never stopped. Not for a single second. I love you too, she replied, her voice muffled against his chest. I love you, and I'm so angry at you, and I'm so scared, and I don't want to waste any more time on silence and distance. They stood there on the terrace, holding each other as the world continued around them, not caring who might see or what anyone might think. For the first time in 7 months, the coldness between them melted, replaced by the warmth they had thought was lost forever. The next morning, true to her word, Sienna had made an emergency appointment with Dominic's doctor. First thing the next morning, they sat in the sterile waiting room, hands clasped tightly together, united in their fear but no longer alone in it. When Dr. Patterson finally called them back, his expression was serious but not grave. He reviewed the old files, then ordered a new round of tests, blood work, imaging, a thorough examination. The results took hours. Dominic and Sienna waited, talking about everything and nothing, making up for 7 months of silence with words that flowed freely now. She told him about the nights she cried herself to sleep. He told her about the mornings he wanted nothing more than to wake her with kisses but forced himself to stay away. They shared their pain, their fear, their regret. When Dr. Patterson returned, both of them held their breath. "I have good news," he said, and the world seemed to exhale with them. "The irregularity we found 7 months ago has completely resolved. Whatever it was, whether it was inflammation or a temporary condition, it's gone. All your current tests show you're in perfect health, Mr. Ashford." The silence in the room was deafening. "What?" Dominic finally managed. "You're healthy," Dr. Patterson repeated, smiling now. "I understand we gave you a worst-case scenario before, and for that, I apologize. We wanted you to be prepared for all possibilities. But the follow-up tests we recommended would have shown this much earlier. Your prognosis is excellent. There's no reason to believe you won't live a long, healthy life." Sienna made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Dominic sat frozen, unable to process the words. Not dying, healthy, long life, all those months of distance, of coldness, of preparing for an end that wasn't coming. He had almost destroyed his marriage over a diagnosis that had resolved itself. "Thank you, doctor," Sienna said, her voice shaky but grateful. "Thank you so much." As they left the office and stepped into the bright morning sunlight, Dominic pulled Sienna close. "I wasted 7 months of our life together," he said quietly. "No," she replied firmly. "You were scared and you made a mistake. A huge, terrible, relationship-destroying mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. The question now is, what are we going to do with the time we have?" He looked down at her, this woman who had every right to leave him, to hate him, but who stood here offering forgiveness and a future. "I'm going to love you," he said. "Every single day, with everything I have, I'm going to make up for every ignored word, every cold shoulder, every moment I pretended you didn't matter when you were the only thing that mattered. I'm going to wake you up with kisses and fall asleep holding you close. I'm going to tell you I love you so many times you'll get sick of hearing it." "Impossible," she said, smiling through fresh tears. "I could never get sick of that." 6 months later, the penthouse had changed. Where before it had felt like a beautiful mausoleum, cold and silent, it now felt like a home. Music played softly through the rooms. Laughter echoed off the walls. Warmth radiated from every corner. Dominic had made significant changes to his work schedule, delegating more and insisting on leaving the office by 6 every evening. Some nights he didn't go in at all, working from home so he could have lunch with Sienna, steal kisses between conference calls, and simply exist in her presence. The bedroom that had become his lonely prison was now converted into a home office. He and Sienna had moved his belongings back into their master bedroom, back to the bed they shared, back to falling asleep tangled in each other's arms. They had started seeing a therapist together, working through the trauma of those 7 months, learning to communicate better, building their marriage even stronger than before. And every night, before they fell asleep, Dominic would whisper the same words against her skin. "I see you. I love you. I'm never ignoring you again." On this particular evening, they stood on their terrace once more, looking out over the city as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Dominic wrapped his arms around Sienna from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "That night," she admitted, "when I told you that you could hate me, but not to ignore me." "I think about it too," he said. "That was the moment everything changed. The moment I realized that trying to protect you by pushing you away was the most selfish thing I could do," she turned in his arms to face him. Promise me something? Anything. Promise me that no matter what life throws at us, no matter how scared we get, we face it together. No more secrets, no more hiding. Just us, together, through everything. I promise, he said, sealing the words with a kiss. Together, always. And there, in the golden light of the setting sun, with the city alive below them and the future stretching bright ahead, they held each other close. Two people who had almost lost everything, who had found their way back from the brink, who had learned that love isn't about protection, it's about presence. You can't protect someone from pain by breaking their heart first, but you can promise to hold their hand through whatever comes. And that, Dominic had finally learned, was the only promise worth making.